And we're live. We're recording.
All right. Welcome to Some Like It Unauthorized. That's what we're calling it. A discussion about films, about film history. For now, going through it one film at a time, but we're a couple of film enthusiasts. I'm Jay Brooks Young, and I've got Zachary Domes.
Zachary Domes, yeah.
With me. And we're talking about Lawrence of Arabia. Why are we starting here? Well, we've been going through a list trying to cover some of our blind spots in film history and trying to get context from your silence up to the present day. And where we're starting this podcast is where we are on the list, which is 1962. And probably the biggest film of that year was Lawrence of Arabia, which I had never seen. You had seen it before, Zach. What was the context for that?
Yeah, I had seen it before. I think I've, for a long time, probably 10 years or so, I've always kept up on YouTube lists and film talk in various places. Lawrence of Arabia was one of those films that kind of kept coming up, and especially for its visual and cinematography aspects. So I think it was probably in quarantine days back in 2021 when I started going through some films that were on my bucket list because I had the time. And I think I just watched it on my own one day. Friends were out and I was just looking for something to do. I put it on thinking that it was going to be slow. Like, I don't know, that the trailers and some of the imagery that I had seen of it, I thought I was anticipating a kind of a slower film, but I was surprised of how drawn in I got pretty early on in the film, and just enjoyed the 3.5 hours or whatever it is. And so yeah, I was looking forward to rewatching it with you and seeing how my perspective might be changed.
Yeah, it's fun. It's such an interesting film because it is slow in a lot of spots, but you're right, it is engrossing that entire time, and it's kind of all comes down to how, the visuals and how it's edited and stuff. Like, I'm immediately thinking about the section when he goes back to rescue the guy that got left behind when they're trying to cross the desert, and I think that sequence has kind of been copied a lot of times in films like The Good, the Bad, the Ugly, because it's got this meditative thing where you're really feeling this sense of the heat and just like the way it would feel like something that's going on forever as he's trying to just survive and get through this thing, cutting back to the sun and then back to them and this big open empty desert. Yeah, it's got sequences like that are really deliberate but really, really engrossing.
Yeah, it doesn't start you off with the desert, which I think is important. It starts you off in England, and it shows you Lawrence there in that context immediately, but it doesn't stay there for very long, especially relative to the time of the whole entire movie. So you are immediately, though, one of the other things besides the story is I am at least drawn into Lawrence's character, and what's the actor's name?
Peter O'Toole.
Yeah, his performance is just so engrossing in itself. You're drawn into who he is and the kind of person he is. He's obviously different than every other soldier there, in that time. He is unique, but he's not so unique that you feel like he's unrelatable. He's got this kind of quality of intrigue just as a character, and so once you get to the desert, you are, you're wrapped in to see how, how he might survive out there, and what he'll be doing out there. You're cheering for him from the beginning.
Yeah, yeah. And you're trying to figure him out the entire time. And yeah, that's what I was really taken with getting to watch this for the first time. Besides the visuals, was this character study that it's doing, and how you're getting the sort of contradictions of this guy, and sort of the unknowability of him, there's never really an easy answer to who he is, and kind of like, why he's there. Is he there for himself, out of this sort of ego and self-belief? Is he there to try to be like a savior to the Arabs, like
Right.
he kind of proclaims to be? Yeah, it's really well handled, and I kind of feel like it's perfect. It's the perfect story for when this film comes out, where it's not too sort of nationalistic about the British Empire, and kind of at this moment in history, in around 62, you're seeing a lot of kind of countries becoming newly independent, and imperialism sort of waning globally, and people starting to, realize that things have been really detrimental to people around the world, and things have needed to change. And like, this film is able to show you where this guy might have had good intentions, and also where he was hopelessly sort of naive and kind of stuck in the British mindset they would have been brought up in, of, some kind of superiority or whatever. So like it kind of came out at the perfect moment, where I think it still holds up pretty well, considering that you have like prominent roles of the Arab characters played by white people, and stuff like that. It still manages to tell overall kind of a very even-handed story,
Yeah, I mean, I'd agree. I this time around, I was more impacted by, or at least I did notice a lot more clearly, just his struggle with his own identity, and being kind of towards the end, somewhere in between Britain and Arabia, and his confrontation with that, of course, in the moment when he has to recognize the color of his skin, and that he isn't from there, even though over the course of the film he becomes more and more a part of that culture. There's a kind of there's an empathy that one can have for people, for individuals who feel appreciative of other cultures, and that they are somewhat an anomaly, a kind of an outsider to both cultures, in that way that they don't quite fit into either or, even though they have a kind of an appreciation for both, or for one. Of course, he also struggles with this throughout the film, not being able to totally accept the Arabian cultures either. So he's an interesting person. I don't know, and you could reflect on his personality as what it's like to be open-minded to different cultures, and what are the kind of the downsides of that. I don't think there's any easy answers here, and especially in today's climate, I think these answers and questions can get tricky. But yeah, I think it handles it well, and it still begs questions today that are worth asking, I would say.
Yeah, yeah. It's kind of it's a good subject also for a biographical film like this, because he was kind of it seems that he was kind of unknowable in real life as well, that people had sort of conflicting accounts of him, that there were times when he said conflicting things, did conflicting things. He writes this book, The Seven Pillars of Wisdom, that the film is mostly based on. And he agrees to be a part of the photo shows or whatever they call them, but the sort of publicity about what the British were doing over there during the war that kind of makes him a public figure. So you could say, like, he was open to capitalizing on that, but then he tries to re-enlist later after the war under a different name and tries to get back into service just at the lowest level. So yeah, you like it's sort of true to life. Like, you can't really know this guy. It's kind of like when we talked about A Complete Unknown last year, which we both really ended up appreciating because it didn't try to like solve Bob Dylan,
Right.
This film gives you a sense of like why he might have been over there for you to kind of figure out for yourself, and it lends those sensations of this beautiful kind of hostile but I don't know, really alluring landscape. You get that through those incredible like visuals and the way that this film is made.
Which, by the way,
you have to
decide. That, by the way, is an unbelievable, often talked about point, but it's forever worth mentioning that this is an epic that shot, I think, mostly on location, and
yes,
its effect is incredible, and it makes one wonder eternally. This is the question we always are asking ourselves: is why in the world more movies are not made like this? Still, I know the money is a thing, but man, just look at the difference between something like this and something made today that's more CGI and all that stuff. I mean, it's an incredible. One thing I read about it, just as a side note, is that of all the epic kind of landscape shots when they're kind of panning across and seeing the armies moving across the desert, they're all left to right to give this kind of impression that there's a journey. This has been an epic journey from east to west, I think. So every shot panning, all these armies are always left to right. There's that, and then there's the fact that these landscapes are also not shot in like Ireland or New Zealand. They're shot in the desert. Can you imagine? Oh my gosh.
This had to be really arduous. It's kind of, it's like deserts and jungles. Those are your two locales when you're making a film that are really difficult, it seems like.
Yeah. Right. Can we think of a film shot on location that's an epic like this prior to this? Nothing rings a bell to me. I mean, I know that people have dabbled with things like this, but
maybe Taboo, the F.W. Murnau, like, and he was kind of, I think he worked with Robert Flaherty, however you say that, the Nanook of the North guy. I think they worked together on that because that was sort of an innovation of Flaherty's, going out and shooting in real places.
Right.
So that was that.
And you have your your Italian neorealism, but nothing that I can think of in that world is quite as epic as this, where you have the sprawling battles or army, people, like how many people were in one scene in some of the peak moments. You're talking thousands of actors just kind of in one shot, and they're all being told what to do and where to go, sometimes extremely far in the distance. I mean, one of the first opening shots is this kind of incredible sand dune vista where you can see these two huge sand dunes, and then beyond that, mountains in the distance, and I think it's the second sand dune. Up around it comes these two guys on their horses, right? Lawrence and his first traveling partner. And when you first see that shot, you're not thinking, oh, that's going to be a shot where two people appear. At least I'm not. I'm just thinking, oh, that's an opening landscape vista. But sure enough, they're the
Yeah.
two tiny characters are out there, and that's the way the whole film operates, much like that.
Yeah, no, like you think of something like Spartacus a couple of years before, using all those extras, the way that like a Cecil B. DeMille film would or something, but still relying a lot on sets the rest of the time. Yeah, this was a whole different animal.
Yeah, he even, I was also, since we've been going through this list, we've gone through Godard only a couple of years now, and he's been active. And so he's taken the camera off of the tripod and he's moving it around. And that is what we do with this movie, too, right in the beginning as well. Even before the desert, we're on a motorcycle with Lawrence. And, there's so
Yeah,
many movies that would have,
that
that would have been like some sort of weird green screen behind him. But no, with this, we are immediately on that motorcycle with him.
No, that very much reminded me of the opening of Colonel Blimp, the Powell and Pressburger movie,
Right.
which is like the movie that committed to trying to show you like stuff like that. We're gonna take you like on a motorcycle, and that's of course where David Lean got his start, was editing over in England, and he edited two of their films, the 49th Parallel and Our Aircraft is Missing, before he got his start directing stuff. So like he takes the sort of commitment to pushing the boundaries, like technically, from those guys. And we should at this point mention The Searchers as well, and John Ford, who was the other guy who really, really used location shooting to great benefit. And Lean and the producer of this one, Sam Spiegel, both said that they really looked at The Searchers when they were planning this film out. And of course, that comes across in kind of the themes and the way that it's structured, but it's the use of the locations as well. And that's funny to think about in 62, because now The Searchers is thought of as, one of the most influential totemic films. But in 62, John Ford was kind of at a nadir in his reputation in the critical community. I was looking at where his films landed in the different Sight and Sound lists per decade, and the one that comes out in 62 is the one that he gets the fewest votes in. He has a couple of films that fall outside of like the top 30 films. But there was no other decade where he got as few votes and his films were like as low on the list relative. And like he was making Who Shot Liberty Valance at this time. Like they weren't letting him go out and shoot on location anymore. They wanted him to shoot in black and white on sets. So it's funny that they identified like, this is how we want to make this film. We want to make it like The Searchers, while his reputation wasn't really all that great, and it would take kind of another decade for him to kind of rebound in people's minds.
Wow, yeah, that's interesting. I didn't realize that. I've been to Monument Valley before, where a lot of the
we've been together.
Yeah, that's
right.
We've been there together too, and that's right, on that road trip we did. And I remember then reading a little something about John Ford there, and it's a little bit of a gray area, I think, for the natives and for people in that kind of world, because though John Ford probably had good relations with them and them allowing him to shoot there, it does bring up interesting questions of the ethics of that. You would want the director and the team to have I don't know, the utmost respectability towards that culture and towards that land. I think of Scorsese with his most recent film and how much attention was paid to um, the care and appreciation of that land and those people. And I don't know the full story with John Ford, but I can only imagine Scorsese does it a bit better with all that we've learned since. And I bring that up only because we're talking about Lawrence of Arabia, and with this film being in a different location than where most of the crew is from, I know I've read that it was shown to the king of Saudi Arabia, or what you might call him at the time.
Was it Jordan?
Or maybe it was Jordan.
Or
yeah. It was one of those countries, and I don't remember what the exact politics was at the time. But I remember they showed it to them because I think he had not seen it. And he was sort of threatening to censor it before he'd ever seen it. Something like this, or at least he was weary. And then he watched it and he loved it. I think he'd switched totally after seeing the full thing, and he applauded it. Yeah, it's one of those things where, yeah, creating good relations with the people of the land. If you're shooting something epic like this, about an intricate history and a historical moment for that other culture too, you want to get it right in that sense, and you want to make sure everybody from that place, for the most part, are, equally accepting and equally in it as you are, if you're doing that.
Yeah. Well, I mean, thinking about when it was made and the conventions of the time, this does a good job, and this, like, you can tell that they're trying a lot harder than a lot of other filmmakers would be to, portray the Arabs, like, fairly, and, like, I don't know, like, casting someone like Alec Guinness in that role as Prince Faisal, like, he brings a lot of sort of presence and kind of like a respectability, sort of, like, it's something you would never do now, but, like, at the time, that is something that is done in an attempt to bring that different culture, like, up to the same level as the people that this film is made by, and, like, the audience that it's made for, of English speaking people. So, like, yeah, like, it's an interesting, like, moment in history when that is still something that is acceptable to do, but you can tell that the intentions are good, and that when you take that into consideration, the story is still kind of holds up, and you can still kind of watch it and think about it, like, you can still get something out of that, even today.
Yeah.
I mean, it's interesting, though. Like, this is such a difficult and intensive film to take on. It's got a huge budget. There's so many moving parts. So, like, I don't know. It's interesting that he would want to take this on. I don't have a great sense of the man himself, but, he tried to get into the film industry at a pretty young age. That's how he kind of started working on a studio and got some work editing, and slowly made his way up to being a director. So, he's one of these guys that I think reveres the art form and wants to push it as far as possible. So, like, yeah, like, I kind of, when you see the film, it's like you understand why he made it. Like, there's something so incredible in how this film can transport you to a place, and, like, give you these, like, feelings of just, like, awe at the landscapes and things, like, yeah, you want to, like, that's a huge sort of challenge, and it's like, if you have the opportunity, I guess you want to take it. And it seems like he got kind of addicted to chasing that, because it was Bridge Over the River Kwai before this, another pretty big film, and then he kind of only does epics after this. Um, and he has some like missteps where people won't let him make these huge films for, years and years at a time, but he doesn't even want to try making anything else after this. And I guess I get it. It's interesting, like I would think you would still want to try to make something small. You would still want to like find the power in a small film too, but he really seemed to kind of latch on to how special a big film like this can be, and you know make that his sole pursuit in life after this.
That makes me think of his films that he did before this. One film we saw, which was A Brief Encounter, that's also on the Sight and Sound list. In some sense, that film had a big impact on me because I really appreciated the story, and I felt like that film was very modern feeling, and I kind of, I don't know, some part of me thinks that A Brief Encounter feels more modern than Lawrence of Arabia, but I may be some part of me that may be not seeing that correct. I mean, what are your thoughts?
Yeah, it feels more grounded, more sort of like kind of mundane, you know, of a story. It feels like it's about these normal people and just this like uh kind of incidental attraction that happens between them. Yeah, like that, yeah, that feels out of step because it is telling this like story of just regular people. Um, so I do see where you're coming from there. Like the like, and like there's the acting too. Like
Mm-hmm.
they're kind of playing a sort of toned down, naturalistic um, type of acting in that film, whereas Lawrence of Arabia is that very classic British, where really, affecting these big emotions and, kind of playing to the back row. Yeah, yeah. So, like, yeah, it's interesting that those come from the same director.
Yeah,
But like, yeah, he kind of knew what each film required, sort of in that way.
yeah, it is. I think it's the risk that you run into when you're doing a bigger budget epic film is like keeping everything naturalistic. I don't even know if it's that possible to, if you have done it. People still making epic films today that just don't feel, you know, true to life. And partly because we, as kind of normal people, don't know what it's like to be, living this kind of epic adventure of sorts, or being a king and an emperor in all these different kind of heroic characters or large characters. Um, and that, just as a viewer, sometimes that takes me out of it a little bit. It's like I'm more drawn into the epic scale of the things and some of the story, but sometimes it can be a little difficult to stay with the acting at times, because yeah, that's something that can be more easily dated than something that's just like two characters that randomly meet and then you're just in their world and where they're at.
Yeah, Brief Encounter is so much more emotionally affecting, um, and sometimes a kind of like story, archetypical epic story can be that. But
Hmm.
this is a little more sort of intellectually stimulating. I
Hmm.
don't emotionally um, like connect with it in that same way. Um, which is, yeah, it's kind of what that's kind of a secondary concern, I think, of what the film's trying to do. Um, but I feel like I did see uh, some of the reaction, the reviews at the time echoed what you just said. I think that you're more dazzled by the film than you are really moved by it, or at least by the sort of character story. Um, and like maybe that's why this film now isn't just like at the top of a Sight and Sound list or something. Like I think this is at like 130 or something like that.
Mm-hmm.
I think it lands higher on director lists usually because of that scale and the influence and kind of just the way that he made a film that was unlike anything else before. But critics are often thinking about like what connected to me the most, and it doesn't reach, and like I don't know, I'm trying to think what would the like biggest sort of film be that I've connected to, at a really deep emotional level. I'm not sure.
Yeah, I think it comes a little. It will follow this film. I think in some sense that this film does a lot of new things, makes it puts it in that box that you're describing. Like it tried a lot of new things. It was a scale that no one had seen on location, with actors and all of that. So yeah, that's kind of what you get now with time is more difficulty in relating to the emotional aspect of it. Whereas I would say you're not going to see too much time pass until people start to replicate this in ways in which you can relate to the characters more. Coppola being one of those directors.
Yes.
Apocalypse Now, All in the Jungle, like you said, and with characters that like each one is their own little world. Like you think of a character and you're like, you don't just think of their story so much as you remember kind of the things they experienced in the film and what they were probably feeling in that experience. And that's, what is that, less than 10 years after this, or around 10 years after this?
Yeah. Or how about A Days of Heaven?
Mm-hmm.
Could you categorize that in epic? Because that might be the sort of balance we were wondering about. Of
Yeah.
can you be natural and sort of grounded within an epic? Because I definitely think he's borrowing on some of the kind of visual aspects, and that film can really get to you emotionally. So yeah, that's maybe something like that, which could like, yeah, that's kind of telling almost a smaller story, but it's the way that it's portrayed that makes it epic, I guess.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and then you have Spielberg at times, or something like Forrest Gump, right? Like it's often cartoonish in its emotional experience, but it is epic. And your average audience will see that movie and be like fully with all those characters in a way that's like, as cartoonish as it sometimes is, it's very like alive, each character. Whereas with this, there are just times, and again, I don't know if that's the direction or whatnot, that was happening on set, but there are times where it feels a little bit older than the time we're in now. And that's interesting. That's an interesting thing to think of in terms of the era we're in right now, the early 60s, which is sort of this transitional period between the 50s and the later 60s, 70s, where directors like Godard and certain other and Antonioni, they're trying things out that are really new, and some of them, like Godard, are doing it completely new. Like the whole thing, every layer of the film is new. And then there are directors who are trying to keep up with that, and yeah, they're still got one foot in the past, and so their films sometimes feel a little bit imbalanced or fractured in a way. They feel like the film itself is one foot in the past, one foot in the future or in the present.
Yeah, I think that's why it's going to take, a Spielberg or a Coppola to kind of merge those two schools and give you a sort of grounded emotional epic, because they are still operating at this time. The David Leans and the other big directors, they want this all to be kind of readable. They don't want to risk alienating the audience, and they just didn't have that experience of kind of more opaque or personal film, like the stuff that we think of as like new wave.
Yeah.
So, yeah, it is like it's such a kind of pivot point in film history. Um, yeah, like I like thinking about like Leone again and the Dollars trilogy that he's going to make a couple of years after this. Like this feels like it's like such an influence on that. Like the techniques are going to be applied so many different ways. You're going to have westerns that have comedy and kind of melodrama, and you're going to have spy thrillers, and you're going to like this is the it's sort of like what Spielberg kind of did after this film. I don't know, that's like he kind of it's filmmakers like him that took these techniques and said, we can kind of apply these to any film, and the power is like there. They have this really great effect on the audience. But yeah.
One other thing I would add too about this film, and I'd love to hear what you think of this, is if I think of those other epic films that either came after or before, a lot of times they feel like they have their like segments, like they very much have their chapters. With this film, something about it as a character study and just as also a narrative felt very like linear. Like the whole thing kind of fits together in a very like almost flattened way. Like it definitely has its own chapters like the other ones, but to me less so. Do you know what I mean? Like if we think of Apocalypse Now or the Good, the Bad, the Ugly. I mean, it really has its distinct chapters. With Lawrence of Arabia, I felt like part of the reason why it feels slow, I think, is that it's like the whole thing feels like itself. The whole thing feels like one long, straight journey. Obviously broken up to some degree, but man, the whole thing just kind of feels like the same chapter. It's like one long chapter almost.
Yeah. It's kind of just the intermission that splits it up, and you feel like there's been this jump in time sort of when you come back and they're doing the train derailment. Yeah, I think that's just like maybe that's just the thing of difficulty. Like it's really hard to keep the kind of continuity through a whole epic film like this, and maybe it's sort of planned. Other filmmakers plan to do it in sections to stay safe. Maybe that kind of arises out of necessity when they find that it's really difficult to kind of make everything go along smoothly and cohesively the entire time. But like I think that's just this kind of proves the prowess of David Lean, is like he kind of was able to plan this whole film and bringing that editor brain kind of sketch out like this is how every scene is going to flow into the next one, and how we're going to make this one roller coaster ride that you're never sort of letting up from. Yeah.
Yeah, and a lot of the kind of politics of the location at the time, you come to know them, but to some extent, especially the tribal conflicts are sometimes background. You come to know them to some degree, but they can also feel like a backdrop to the life and adventure that Lawrence is embarking on, which again gives that feeling of like coherency throughout. Like you stay with Lawrence, and it's the title of the film, and that's what it's all about is this man's journey.
Yeah, that's sort of they accomplish that, that coherency because it stays subjective to his kind of experience. It in a lot of ways it doesn't feel like a war film that way.
Right.
Yeah,
exactly. Even though there are epic battles, It's none of the in a lot of other epics. Suddenly, the focus will be shifted to one of the leaders of that battle, you know, and so your sense of time is shifted in that case because now you're no longer with Lawrence. You'd be with whoever that guy is, and then maybe you shift to back to Europe or England, and you're just in the room with some general who's been ordering Lawrence around, but you don't actually see that until Lawrence is going to be in that same room. You're never time doesn't shift outside of Lawrence's time very much
Yeah.
at all, and so time is just flat and moving along with Lawrence.
And that strengthens that character study because there's such a strong effect when he returns to Cairo and he's now wearing the garb. I forget what's called, but it feels like he's been living this entirely different life. No one recognizes him now, and you just wouldn't have that effect if you had kind of been cutting back and been spending time in Cairo or with other British characters that while he was out in the desert.
Yeah, it's a white garb too, which must be symbolic of some kind, and that partner that he finds early on, his garb is just pitch black. I think likely some sort of symbology or meaning to that.
He does get famous because people were so taken with the photos of him wearing that garb when they had those like showings in Britain. Like those photos really stood out. So I think that he must be wearing the like all white in those photos too, I imagine.
Right.
Because I saw people say like, oh man, Peter O'Toole looks just like T.E. Lawrence in real life, minus the height difference, because apparently he was actually like 5'5", and Peter O'Toole is like over 6 foot.
Well, we'll let that one be. No, that's good.
Yeah. We haven't talked at all about the sort of the queer undertones in this film either, which from the time that it was made, can't be made explicit at all because of censors, but like it's interesting how much they do imply still in this film, and that they bring in the stuff like the S&M stuff, which at this point people knew about, but like it kind of, I think, wasn't really talked about because people didn't want to. That would have been seen as kind of disparaging the character of this guy. But so it's like really interesting that they decide to incorporate that, and like right from the beginning you've got him talking about doing the lighter tricks and telling the guy no, the way to do it is to be okay with being hurt or whatever. I was listening to some stuff about Lawrence's life, and apparently someone after his death came forward with these love letter. Well, I don't know if you call them love letters, but like he had some kind of relationship with a man where he took on this very elaborate role play in these letters, where he would write as an uncle, a fictional uncle who was asking this guy to punish the like nephew character that Lawrence like played in their relationship, and to tell him about how he had to punish him, and like it's these very elaborate kinky letters. Like he had suffered some like traumas and abuses, and some stuff that he wrote about in that book, 7 Pillars of Wisdom, and other stuff that was only alluded to and kind of I guess speculated about. But it felt like he was trying to work his way through his like experiences and traumas during the war, with this stuff that he got into, this like S&M stuff. Yeah,
Wow.
a really, really interesting guy. And
Hmm.
like, I think that connects even to the motorcycle and that he was maybe being reckless enough to die in an accident like that, like
Hmm.
it kind of comes across in the film too, this like sense of someone who had um some like insecurity and like feelings of inferiority or guilt, that wanted to like put himself in danger, and that's why he would you know be so willing and spend so much time out in this desert and out fighting this conflict.
Hmm.
Yeah, a really, really complicated guy, I think. And it's kind of, I commend the film because like I think you can think about all those things, and you like this film doesn't shut those things out from the
Hmm.
depiction. Like that's all sort of there for you to consider.
Right. I mean, and having not known that and not done that research, I don't think that I would have been able to tell that. So the film disguises it enough to not make it noticeable to somebody who's not looking for it or doesn't see it in the research after the fact.
Yeah,
But at the same time, I think, like we were talking about in the beginning about Lawrence and who he was as a person, and being like open to another culture, being willing to kind of do the thing that no one else wanted to do, partly because he was different. It's one of those things where you obviously don't want hardship, and uh, you don't want the world to be inhospitable to people um, exploring their own paths. At the same time, without some uh, pushback to some degree, without some lines to have to be pushed back on, you don't get sometimes you don't get people, or sometimes a person won't have their own kind of awakening. I see Lawrence as somebody who's more awake than the other people around him, especially in the beginning. Like he's all the other British actors and that are around him, those people, those characters, they're all kind of like, "Oh, Lawrence, you silly guy," but like we already know, like he's more interesting than them. And again, you don't want like a hardship in life to have to wake you up in some sense, but like it is interesting that that like difficulty and encountering problematic scenarios, let's say, can be and is a lot of times the thing that wakes somebody up, that causes them to look outside themselves and see what else is possible. Maybe that's who they are, maybe it's this kind of repression that they've had to endure uh, in order to not reveal who they are, or maybe it's just a different culture to learn about, or whatever it might be. Yeah, he's a really neat character in that way, I guess. Now knowing that he's not only very open to the world around him, but he's also open to like who he is, and the possibilities there.
yeah, that's the thing about this film that works, where it doesn't really try to explain him, because there's no way to know, and all those things are kind of connected in different ways. um
Hmm. Yeah, and that makes me think of a lot of characters of the past too. I think of Walt Whitman and others, poets who were also who were always kind of revealing themselves through their poetry, but not like so discreetly that their poetry would be censored. Um,
yeah,
but
right.
now looking back, we're like clearly they were pretty free with their sexuality and just weren't. We're only showing that through their letters if they wrote them or through other ways.
Yeah, and it makes sense that he's someone who kind of questions the sort of British imperialism, that doesn't feel quite um like at home in the British society, and wants to escape that. um it's equally interesting that he seems to get an inflated sense of himself, and you know
Mm,
gets this ego of, they can't kill me, they'll need a golden bullet to kill me. as he says when he's astride the derailed train.
It definitely
Like,
achieves a Western feeling there. It really becomes quite Western in that sort of towards the end of that whole sequence. Definitely,
film Western, you mean?
yeah, yeah.
Yeah, yeah. Um,
In its mythos, it becomes mythical.
yeah, yeah. It in a way it helps me, I don't know, understand Westerns better, because I feel like I can kind of understand the context of, like, this guy was in the army, but then he feels like he's able to affect like this sort of global, or I mean regional conflict, but like something that's a very, very, large um, thing. Like, he feels like he's able to have like a real effect on it, and that changes sort of how he sees himself. And, like, I don't know, maybe sometimes I don't, maybe that sometimes that feels like larger than life, and kind of like hard to relate to, or sort of, I don't know, feel the realism of in westerns. But maybe it kind of makes more sense to me in this film.
Mm, yeah, I see what you're saying. I mean, when I think of the mythos of the Western. A lot of times like if it's a once upon a time kind of story where it's based on something that happened, but maybe the details are tuned up a bit, half imagined, let's say. I think that what that does is it just reminds us of the importance of imagination and the importance of um, the importance of telling a story not for the sake of getting the details accurate, but for the sake of creating meaning. Like whether or not Lawrence was shot at, a bunch of times and it didn't get hit, maybe just nicked in the shoulder. Whether or not that's true is it's not important to anyone but a historian who
Right.
his their only goal is to get the facts exactly right. A storyteller's goal is to inspire and create hope and create meaning. And and if the details can't be known, you have a little bit of a you have wiggle room, right? If a historian isn't there to say, actually he was shot at only one time, then you can write a little extra into it just to make it feel that much more inspiring and interesting and meaningful.
Yeah, it feels like this gets across the emotional truth of the man and his story.
Yeah.
And yeah, I've seen some quotes of like historians basically saying that same thing of like, this basically does what it's supposed to do as a film. Like, yeah, you get sort of why he was out there and what his accomplishments were, and may the idea that maybe he didn't even know who he was, and at times he really wanted to be this hero, and at other times he felt like he had caused all this suffering, and he couldn't like live with himself, and that all those things that kind of are, they exist in you at the same time.
Hmm. Yeah, exactly. And I think people these days, some people forget that um, not every not everything has to be exactly accurate when it comes to film or art. Countless times I've had to talk about the film Whiplash or La La Land, and not that those films are my favorites by any means, but they aren't trying to get the experience of those people accurate. Rather not, Whiplash isn't trying to get the experience of a drummer in music school accurate. What he's doing with that film is making you feel the level of intensity that is more often the case felt inside. As a drummer in films in music school, you feel intense inside. Yes, of course, your hands aren't becoming bloody from drumming so intensely physically, but emotionally, yes, of course. That should be the most intense emotional feeling you've had your whole life is performing for some, audience in that context. So yeah, no, it's not physical or as extreme as that, but it's that it's inspiring the audience, who's most of them haven't gone to music school, to feel that kind of intensity that one feels inside, the inner turmoil, the inner intensity. We really are at a loss. I've had this discussion with people who can't quite get that. They can't comprehend that dichotomy and understand that that's what the film is doing. And they don't seem to know. They don't seem to. Some people don't seem to almost like want to do that or something. Like the line drawn between fact and imagination has to be very discreet. It can't be blurred. Whereas I'm much more interested in films or art that does blur it. You know, what happens when we tell a story slightly differently to give a slightly different impression? That's interesting, you know. And so with Lawrence, like you're saying, that is what the director's doing. And even if historians say about a film, and even if they said about this film, well, they don't quite get this part right. I I I I I I, I don't know. There's a part of me that's like, cool, but it's a film. It isn't a history book, you know.
Yeah.
It's like, what's the? I mean, again, it's a bit of a gray area for sure, and it's a little bit of a. It's not a clear line by any means. There can for sure be history films that get the history wrong in such a way that's problematic, no doubt. But sometimes it can be very interesting to see the ways in which they tell it and how it can be new.
Yeah. I think it's a Roger Ebert quote where he says that like films are empathy machines, or you know, objects that create empathy. Like we need art in our life. Like we kind of crave what that gives us emotionally, intellectually, and yeah, it's not the same as reading the history or having the history sort of recounted to you fact by fact. This you know has an emotional effect that we kind of need to have a lot of the times. Like we need to empathize with people in the past, or we need to be able to sort of emotionally connect what we are going through to what people went through before. That's kind of invaluable, for like just being able to kind of get through the world. So like you have to try to be unproblematic, sort of. You have to try to like do it the right way, but you can't like we need this, you know. We have to keep trying at this, and you know, he decided to take like all the risks and try to make this film as big and as, you know, try to make it in the best possible way, or the most like affecting way. And I really really appreciate that this exists, you know.
Yeah, you texted after you saw it. You said that this changed film, and I think that's right. I think it absolutely ups the ante on what an epic film can be, at least. And he pushes film forward with this, raises the bar.
Everyone that saw this was sort of changed, and it wasn't even just filmmakers, you know. Like I didn't realize how much like Frank Herbert's Dune was indebted to this. Like that dude went and wrote a whole sci-fi, you know, series of novels because of seeing this film. Like I think that's plainly apparent. Like it, yeah. It's sort of a testament to what film can be, how much this sort of changed people.
Wow. What do you think Herbert was smoking when he watched Lawrence of Arabia?
I don't know.
Because although I could totally see that, I also see obviously a lot of interesting ideas that he added from that.
Yeah,
That's fascinating.
yeah. But I think that those books seem to be so much about imperialism and of course the British imperialism is like the prime example. And the like white
Yeah.
savior that goes and fights with the native population. So as like the films, the film adaptations definitely and take inspiration from this, but like yeah, it's the story is close enough that I think
Mm-hmm.
he himself when writing it was thinking about this film.
Mm-hmm.
um and like I just have to imagine that it reinvigorated someone like Godard to want to make more color, widescreen films like Pierre Lefeu and stuff like that. Like I think it's funny that because Kubrick had already made Spartacus, but I don't think you get 2001 without this film.
Mm.
Um, like it touches so many artists.
Yeah.
I really hope that I get to see it on the big screen at some point. For this one, I was like, I need to be in the dark. I actually took the TV into the bedroom where I could like block out all the light and watched it in there.
Yeah.
Um, which was a really cool experience, and it's you can see it in 4K HDR now, which it looked amazing. It did kind of, my TV struggled and it buffered a couple times and I had to like reset my router and reset my TV and all those things, but it was still really really beautiful in that format. But I would love to see this with a big audience at some point.
Yeah, and as you say that, I'm remembering when I was watching it this time around, I was thinking in the first part of it, I was thinking the coloring of this feels a little bit less saturated than the first time I watched it. And I did watch it on two different services, I'm pretty sure. And I was thinking, what would be the difference there? Like, why is this service streaming a slightly less vibrant version? But then he blows out that match, which cuts to the sunset, and where we jump to the desert, and then it's like that sunset's like, it almost felt like that the sunset and starting there, or is it a sunrise? It's a sunrise, my bad. Is just so that you go from like kind of the beige, uh, beige like uniforms and
Like
beige
offices
surrounding, yeah, and then you go to the
yeah.
desert, which is this like vibrant sunrise, and I'm like, oh, okay, I guess this is the same version. Yeah.
Yeah, that's kind of like that Wizard of Oz
Uh-huh.
trick, and yeah, I hadn't thought about it that way, but he is doing that same kind of super high contrast of two different scenes.
Yeah, kind of blowing out the match, which they just talked about being painful,
Yeah.
to immediately to the desert, which is going to be a lot more painful.
Yeah, you want a challenge, you want some pain, get
Yeah.
ready, buddy.
Yeah. Well, that's Lawrence. We started with an epic. It's 1962. Is this the next film, also 1962, that we're going to talk about next week?
Yeah, an autumn afternoon, right? I think we're gonna do that.
Yeah, and we've seen several Ozu films now.
Yasujiro Ozu.
Yeah, I haven't watched it yet. You've already watched it, and
yeah, I did get a chance to see that in the theater, and it's a beautiful, beautiful film. It'll be a fun contrast because though it's about as small and as quiet as a film can be, especially compared to Lawrence, they're both kind of character studies. So that, yeah, I think that'll be fun to watch, and it'll be kind of for us a send off of Ozu. It was his last film. after we've kind of spent some time in this last year getting to know him through a couple of his films. So yeah, that'll be next week, and then we'll see what comes after that.
Very cool. Good stuff.
I think we'll link probably our letterboxes in the description. Does that make sense?
Yeah, we'll link our letterboxes, and we'll just say the movie we talked about this time, and then we'll also put in Autumn Afternoon put that in there for anyone who's interested in catching that before we talk about it. Yeah, this is all we have for now. It's just the podcast. So our only links are letterboxed. Who knows if we'll make a different home for this at some point, but yeah.
Yeah. That's where we do our writing right now, and where we have kind of kept our notes as we've gone through film history prior to this. And yeah, we'll see if we kind of branch out and put any writing anywhere else.
Yeah, I should make that list public at this point too. The list that you've made, I'll can attach that to my profile just so it's there and share it with you if you want to do the same.
Yeah.
What are there, like almost 500 films you put on that list?
Yeah, just short of 500. Because that started with the Sight and Sound 250 that came out in 2022. But there are a lot of gaps if you're trying to get a more complete look at film history. So I try to fill in some of those gaps, and there's still some things there that I think will stick out as missing to people, where I probably already watched them, or we both already watched them and didn't put them on the list.
Mm-hmm.
Especially closer to today, there's very few like 90s or further films, because we've seen a lot of 90s and contemporary films.
Mm-hmm.
And this is sort of a historical list. But yeah.
I mean, still a lot I haven't seen, still a lot of catching up to do. It's endless, so.
Yeah.
Okay. But very fun.
I think that's it.
That was good. Good first one.
Yeah.
You really do your research.
Yeah. I tried to listen to a bunch of podcasts and stuff.